In the heart of a green and golden kingdom, surrounded by silver rivers and fields of dancing wheat, there stood a grand palace with 100 shining towers. And in that palace lived King Birendra Bahadur, a kind hearted but slightly forgetful ruler. He loved his people dearly, but he had one very strange habit. He often made the most ridiculous decisions. If someone came to him asking for a cow, he might give them a chair. If someone wanted to be a soldier, he might make them the royal gardener instead. And yet, the people loved him because his heart was pure and his laughter was contagious. But one day, the king found himself in a serious problem. The king's royal advisor, an old man named Bhairav, decided to retire. He had grown too old to keep up with king's endless questions and funny orders. So one morning, he bowed deeply before the king and said, "Your Majesty, it is time I rest my old bones. You must find someone wiser and younger to advise you." The king was startled. "Find someone wiser than you? Impossible. But if I must, I shall hold a grand competition." And so it was announced across the land. The king seeks a new royal advisor. Only the wisest shall be chosen. The palace messengers carried this news far and wide. Soon, scholars, philosophers, and clever men from every corner of the kingdom began marching towards the palace. Some wore glasses thicker than mango pickles. Some carried books taller than their heads. And all of them thought, "Surely I'm the wisest of all." On the morning of the competition, the king sat upon his golden throne, his crown slightly tilted. "Welcome, great thinkers," he said with a grand smile. "Today I shall ask three questions. Whoever answers best shall become my new royal advisor." The hall filled with murmurs of excitement. The king cleared his throat dramatically. "Here is the first question. How heavy is the shadow of an elephant?" The hall went silent. The scholars began whispering to one another. One man quickly took out a notebook and began scribbling numbers. Another ran to the window to check the sunlight's angle. At last, the first scholar bowed and said confidently, "Your Majesty, after deep calculations, the shadow of an elephant weighs exactly 1032 royal pounds when the sun is at 45 degrees." The crowd gasped. Another scholar stood up. "Utter nonsense. It depends on the elephant's diet and mood. A happy elephant's shadow weighs less." The king's eyes widened. "A happy shadow weighs less? Fascinating." The hall erupted in chaos. Everyone arguing, shouting, showing their imaginary scales. And then, from the back of the room, came a soft giggle. A small boy, barely 12, stood near the door. He wore simple clothes and carried no scroll or book, only a basket of mangoes. "Who are you, young one?" asked the king, curious. The boy bowed politely. "I'm Dashu, son of the royal gardener. I came to bring you mangoes for breakfast, your majesty." The king chuckled. "Ah, mangoes, my favorite. But tell me, Dashu, what do you think? How heavy is the shadow of an elephant?" Dashu smiled and said, "Your Majesty, a shadow is not heavy at all. It weighs nothing." The entire court fell silent. The king's eyes twinkled. Nothing, you say? Yes, your majesty, said Dashu. A shadow is only the play of light. You cannot weigh light or its absence. The king burst into laughter. Marvelous! The wisest answer so far. The scholars turned red with embarrassment. The king leaned forward, his crown slipping down to his nose. Second question, he announced. If a peacock lays an egg at the border of my kingdom and my neighbors, to whom does the egg belong? The scholars frowned, confused again. One man declared, It belongs to both kings equally, Your Majesty. Another argued, No, it must be divided, half to you, half to your neighbor. The king scratched his chin. But how do we divide an egg? Just then, Dashu raised his hand. Your Majesty, he said politely, a peacock does not lay eggs at all. Only the peahen does. The king's mouth fell open. Oh, so that means no egg? Dashu grinned. Exactly, Your Majesty. The king clapped his hands with joy. Brilliant! These scholars have read thousands of books, but you, young boy, have read the world. The court roared with laughter and applause. The king was not ready to stop yet. One last question, he said mischievously, and this one will decide everything. He looked around and declared, If I were to command the royal cow to climb the palace tower, how should she do it? The hall once again filled with confusion. A scholar said, Your Majesty, with proper training and a ramp. Another interrupted, No, no, no. We must build stairs. The king shook his head. But cows don't like stairs. The arguing began again. Ramp, rope, crane, pulley, each idea sillier than the last. Finally, Dashu bowed and said softly, Your Majesty, cows were never meant to climb towers. They belong on the ground, grazing freely. So perhaps it is not the cow that needs to climb, but the king who needs to come down and see her. The hall fell silent. The king blinked and laughed so hard that his crown toppled on the floor. You are right, Dashu. I have been sitting in this palace for too long. It's time I came down to meet my cows. The scholars looked utterly defeated, but they too began to laugh, for Dashu's wisdom was as gentle as it was true. The king stood up proudly. I have made my choice. My new royal adviser shall be Dashu, the gardener's son. The courtiers gasped. But, Your Majesty, he is only a child. Exactly, said the king. His heart is clear, his mind is sharp, and he speaks the truth without fear or flattery. Dashu blushed. But, Your Majesty, I don't know how to advise a king. The king smiled kindly. You already have, Dashu. You taught me that wisdom is not about long words or heavy books. It's about seeing the world as it truly is. From that day on, little Dashu sat beside the king during every council meeting. And whenever the king faced a difficult decision, he would turn to Dashu and ask, Well, my wise one, what do you think? And Dashu, with a twinkle in his eye, would always say something simple yet true, enough to make the king laugh and the whole court think. And so the king's court became famous not for its riches or power, but for its laughter, kindness, and simple wisdom. And the people said that when King Birendra and advisor Dashu ruled together, the sun seemed to shine a little brighter. The life lesson that we learn from this story is true wisdom is not in cleverness or big words. It's in honesty, observation, and kindness. Even the smallest voice, when true, can guide a kingdom.